Imagine opening your eyes at dawn, expecting the comfort of routine, the quiet certainty that yesterday still exists. But something feels wrong. The air is heavier. The silence is unfamiliar. You sense it before you see it, a quiet shift in reality itself. Outside your window, the streets look the same, yet they are not. Flags hang differently. Faces move with urgency instead of purpose. Radios whisper instead of entertain. The world you trusted, the systems, the promises, the idea that tomorrow would always arrive, has begun to crack. This is not fear born from noise or chaos. This is something colder. The realization that history has changed direction, and you are standing inside that moment. War does not always announce itself with fire. Sometimes, it arrives quietly, through broken institutions, failing governments, and the sudden absence of protection. Banks stop functioning. Borders close overnight. Laws lose meaning. The idea of safety becomes a memory instead of a promise. People look to their leaders for answers, but leadership itself is uncertain. Trust, in nations, in alliances, in humanity, begins to erode. And once trust collapses, everything built upon it follows. This is the true beginning of war. Not when the first bomb falls, but when belief dies. Across the world, cities that once symbolized progress are now lit by fire instead of electricity. Factories become targets. Homes become rubble. Streets become battlegrounds. Governments speak in declarations and ultimatums. Alliances harden. Neutrality disappears. Maps are no longer tools of learning. They become weapons of strategy. This is no longer conflict between armies. This is a test of civilization itself. How far will nations go to protect power? How much will humanity sacrifice in the name of survival? The answers will be written in blood, steel, and silence. This is the story of a war that reshaped the planet. A war that reached into every continent, every ocean, every household. World War II was not a single battle or ideology. It was a collision of ambition, fear, nationalism, and unchecked power. Empires rose. Democracies trembled. Entire populations were mobilized, not just to fight, but to produce, obey, and endure. This war would decide who controls the future, and who would be erased from it. Borders were torn apart like paper. Lines drawn by diplomats were rewritten by soldiers. Countries vanished. New nations emerged. Entire regions changed hands multiple times. What it meant to belong to a land, a flag, an identity, was suddenly unstable. Maps no longer reflected geography. They reflected power. And power, in World War II, was constantly shifting. World War II transformed how wars were fought and how humans saw themselves. Technology advanced faster than morality. Tanks replaced cavalry. Aircraft dominated skies. Factories became as important as front lines. Science, once a symbol of progress, became a tool of destruction. Efficiency was applied to killing. Fear was engineered, measured, perfected. And amid this machinery of death, humanity was forced to confront a terrifying question. What happens when survival becomes more important than compassion? 6 years. That is all it took. From the invasion of Poland to the ruins of Berlin and Hiroshima, the world descended into an unbroken chain of violence. Battles lasted days. Consequences lasted generations. Never before had war reached so deeply into civilian life. Never before had death occurred on such an industrial scale. History was no longer being written slowly. It was being torn apart and rewritten in real time. This was not a regional conflict. It was a global catastrophe. Europe burned. Asia collapsed into chaos. Africa and the oceans became silent theaters of struggle. Over 70 million lives were lost, soldiers and civilians, adults and children, guilty and innocent alike. Each number represents a story interrupted, a future erased, a voice silenced. Statistics fail to capture the true cost of this war, because numbers cannot mourn. World War II erased the boundary between battlefield and home. Civilians became targets. Cities became objectives. Children grew up under sirens instead of lullabies. Factories worked day and night. Ration lines replaced markets. Survival became a daily negotiation. The war followed people into their kitchens, their schools, their dreams. There was no escape, only endurance. This documentary is not just about events, it is about forces. You will uncover how political humiliation gave birth to extremism, how fear empowered dictators, how silence allowed evil to grow. You will see how decisions made in private rooms destroyed public lives, and you will understand how fragile peace truly is. Because the conditions that created World War II did not disappear with the last gunshot. They evolve, they hide, they return. History does not repeat itself exactly, but it rhymes. And the greatest danger is not forgetting the past. It is believing we are immune to it. In 1933, Germany stood at a crossroads of history. The nation was exhausted, crushed by economic collapse, wounded pride, and political chaos left behind by World War I. In this fragile moment, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. To many, he appeared to be just another politician in a broken system. But beneath the speeches and promises was a man who understood fear, anger, and desperation, and knew exactly how to use them. This single political appointment would soon reshape not only Germany, but the fate of the entire world. What followed was not sudden. It was deliberate and calculated. Step by step, democratic freedoms were stripped away. Opposition parties were silenced, critics disappeared, and power was concentrated into a single authority. Laws were rewritten, courts were manipulated, and fear became a tool of governance. Within just a few years, Germany was no longer a democracy. It had become a dictatorship where obedience replaced choice, and questioning the state meant risking everything. At the heart of this system was an ideology built on dangerous illusions. The state promoted the belief that certain people were inherently superior, chosen by history itself to rule. This idea was repeated endlessly, through speeches, classrooms, posters, and public ceremonies, until it felt unquestionable. It was a myth designed to unite some while excluding others, replacing shared humanity with hierarchy, and preparing society to accept the unthinkable. Control did not rely on weapons alone, it relied on minds. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and public messaging were reshaped to tell only one story. Schools no longer taught independent thought. Instead, children were molded to serve the state. Police forces answered not to justice, but to ideology. The military swore loyalty not to the nation, but to a single leader. Every institution that shaped daily life was transformed into an instrument of control, leaving no space untouched. Those who did not fit this manufactured ideal were gradually pushed out of society. Laws restricted their rights. Businesses were taken. Families were isolated. Neighbors turned away in silence. Discrimination became official policy, and cruelty was normalized through bureaucracy. What began as words and classifications would later evolve into one of the darkest chapters in human history. At this stage, the warning signs were visible, but the world had not yet acted. While public speeches spoke of peace, preparations for war were already underway. Hidden factories worked day and night. Training camps appeared in remote areas. New weapons were designed in secrecy, defying international agreements. This was not defense, it was preparation. Germany was rebuilding its military strength quietly, patiently, and with clear intent. The foundation for a future conflict was being laid, far from public view. Steel replaced silence. Armored vehicles emerged from factories, engines roaring with purpose. Aircraft formations darkened the skies during training exercises. Young soldiers marched in perfect order, drilled for discipline and obedience. This was not just rearmament, it was a message. Germany was transforming itself into a war machine, one designed for speed, force, and domination. The rhythm of preparation echoed across the nation. Beyond Germany's borders, leaders observed with growing concern. Meetings were held. Agreements were signed. Promises were exchanged. Many hoped that compromise would prevent another catastrophe like World War I. Silence was chosen over confrontation. Delay over resistance. But history has shown that unchecked ambition does not pause, it advances. And with each moment of inaction, the cost of stopping it grew higher. The first major move came in 1938. German forces entered Austria without resistance, and the country was absorbed into the expanding Reich. Crowds filled the streets, some cheering, others frozen in fear. Borders vanished overnight. What had once been unthinkable became reality. This was no longer preparation, it was action, a clear signal that expansion had begun. Next came Czechoslovakia. Under pressure and diplomatic manipulation, territories were taken piece by piece. Maps were redrawn. Communities were divided. Once again, international leaders hoped concessions would satisfy the aggression. Instead, each gain only strengthened the resolve for more. The balance of power in Europe was shifting rapidly and dangerously. There was a final, fragile hope that the expansion would end. That reason would prevail. But history was already moving forward. The momentum of power, ideology, and military force could no longer be reversed peacefully. What the world was witnessing was not the end of a crisis, but the opening chapter of a global catastrophe. The path to World War II was now firmly set. On the morning of September 1st, 1939, the world crossed a line from which there would be no return. Dawn broke quietly across Europe, but beneath that fragile calm, history was already in motion. Borders that had existed for generations were suddenly meaningless. Agreements were shattered. Promises were abandoned. Without a formal declaration of war, Nazi Germany launched a full-scale invasion of Poland. What appeared on maps as thin lines and colored territories now became real ground soaked with fear, fire, and blood. This was not a distant conflict. This was the spark that would ignite a global catastrophe. For Poland, it was the beginning of a nightmare. For the world, it was the beginning of World War II. The invasion came with a force unlike anything Europe had witnessed before. German tanks thundered through Polish cities, their engines roaring like mechanical beasts, crushing streets, walls, and resistance beneath their tracks. Stone buildings that once symbolized stability crumbled in seconds. Above them, the sky was no longer a place of safety. Aircraft filled the air, dark silhouettes against the clouds, releasing bombs that screamed as they fell. Explosions tore through neighborhoods, railways, and communication centers, leaving behind fire, smoke, and silence where life once existed. Civilians ran without direction. Soldiers fought without rest. Entire cities were transformed into battlefields overnight. The speed and brutality of the attack left little time to understand what was happening, only time to survive. War was no longer approaching. War had arrived. This time, the invasion did not go unanswered. Across the English Channel, and within the halls of power in Paris, leaders understood the gravity of what had just occurred. The policy of appeasement had failed. The hope that Hitler could be satisfied without war had collapsed along with Poland's borders. Britain and France did not remain silent. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on their shoulders. Declaring war meant unleashing destruction on a scale never before seen. But remaining silent meant allowing tyranny to spread unchecked across Europe. Behind closed doors, decisions were made that would alter the fate of millions. The era of diplomacy ended. The era of total war began. Just 2 days later, the inevitable became reality. Britain and France officially declared war on Germany. With those declarations, a regional conflict transformed into a global war. Nations would soon be forced to choose sides. Oceans would become battlefields. Cities far from Europe would feel the consequences of decisions made thousands of miles away. What had begun as an invasion of Poland now threatened the balance of the entire world. From this moment forward, no country could truly remain untouched. World War II had officially begun. Germany did not fight this war the way wars had been fought before. Instead, it introduced a terrifying new strategy known as Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Blitzkrieg was designed for speed, shock, and overwhelming force. Tanks, infantry, and aircraft moved as a single, coordinated weapon. Communication lines were destroyed. Supply routes were cut. Enemy defenses collapsed before commanders could even issue orders. The goal was simple: strike fast, strike hard, and leave no time for resistance to organize. Fear became a weapon. Confusion became a tool. This was warfare redefined, efficient, ruthless, and devastating. Polish forces fought bravely, but they were overwhelmed. German tanks advanced faster than defenses could be repositioned. Aircraft dominated the skies, eliminating any chance of control from below. Every attempt to respond came too late. Entire divisions were cut off. Communication collapsed. Roads filled with refugees fleeing the relentless advance. The speed of the invasion shattered traditional military strategy, proving that the old rules of war no longer applied. It was not just a defeat of armies, it was the collapse of an entire system of defense. In a matter of weeks, Poland fell. What many believed would take months or even years was decided with shocking speed. The nation was divided, occupied, and silenced beneath the boots of invading forces. Smoke rose from ruined cities. Fields became mass graves. Families were separated, never to reunite. Poland's fall sent a clear and terrifying message to the rest of the world. No country was safe, no border was secure, and the war had only just begun. By the year 1940, Europe was no longer a continent at peace. What had once been a network of proud nations, cultures, and histories was now transforming into a vast battlefield shaped by fear, speed, and overwhelming force. Borders that had stood for centuries were crossed in days. Governments struggled to react. Civilians woke up to a world changing faster than anyone had imagined. Across Europe, the sound of marching boots, aircraft engines, and distant explosions became part of daily life. This was no longer a regional conflict. This was total war. The military strategy was ruthless, fast, and highly coordinated. Armored divisions moved with unprecedented speed. Aircraft dominated the skies. Communication lines collapsed before defenders could organize a response. Within months, large portions of Europe fell under military occupation, not through slow sieges, but through shock, confusion, and overwhelming pressure. The psychological impact was just as devastating as the physical destruction. Nations realized that traditional defenses were no longer enough. Denmark was among the first to face this new reality. The invasion came swiftly, with little warning. Military resistance was minimal, not because of weakness, but because the imbalance of power was clear from the start. Civilians watched silently as foreign troops entered their cities. There were no great battles in the streets, just a sudden, heavy silence. Denmark's fall sent a message across Europe. No country, no matter how peaceful or unprepared for war, was truly safe. Soon after, attention turned north. Norway, with its strategic coastline and access to key shipping routes, became a critical target. Naval forces entered cold fjords surrounded by snow-covered mountains. Troops moved through frozen terrain under harsh conditions. The landscape was beautiful, but the war that arrived was brutal. For civilians, the invasion felt surreal. One day, normal life. The next, soldiers, checkpoints, and uncertainty. Norway's resistance was fierce in places, but the pressure was overwhelming. The Netherlands soon followed. Airborne troops descended from the sky. Bombs fell on cities that had never imagined such destruction. Rotterdam burned. Historic streets collapsed into rubble. Families fled through smoke-filled roads carrying only what they could hold. The speed of the assault shocked the world. Neutrality offered no protection. Modern warfare had erased old assumptions. Belgium became another tragic chapter. Armored vehicles rolled through countryside villages. Small towns found themselves suddenly on the front lines. Civilians hid in basements as the sound of engines and artillery echoed through narrow streets. Foreign soldiers patrolled cities once filled with normal life. The sense of helplessness spread rapidly. Europe was watching itself fall, one nation at a time. And then, France, a nation with one of the largest armies in the world. A country that had prepared for war for decades. Yet preparation was based on the last war, not the one that arrived. The attack bypassed expected defenses. Forests, roads, and open terrain became pathways for rapid advance. French forces fought bravely, but coordination collapsed. Communication failed. Retreats turned into chaos. In just 6 weeks, France collapsed. 6 weeks that reshaped global history. Soldiers abandoned equipment. Refugees crowded roads stretching for miles. Entire towns emptied overnight. Government buildings fell silent. Orders stopped coming. The speed of defeat stunned the world. No one had believed it could happen so fast. Paris, the cultural heart of Europe, fell soon after. The city of art, philosophy, and freedom stood quiet beneath heavy skies. Cafes closed. Streets emptied. A deep sense of fear replaced the energy that once defined the city. For many across Europe, the fall of Paris was symbolic. If Paris could fall, then nowhere felt safe. By mid-1940, much of Europe lived under occupation or threat. Families listened to radios in silence. Rumors spread faster than facts. Hope became fragile. The balance of power had shifted dramatically, but one nation still stood outside this growing shadow. Across the sea, Great Britain remained defiant. Isolated geographically, outnumbered militarily, yet unwilling to surrender, the ocean became both a barrier and a battlefield. Britain prepared for what many believed was inevitable, an invasion or something worse. Instead of ground troops, the assault came from the sky. Massive air raids targeted cities, factories, and infrastructure. Fighter aircraft clashed high above the clouds. Every day brought new losses. Every night brought new fear. This became known as the Battle of Britain, not just a military conflict, but a fight for survival. Night after night, London burned. Sirens echoed through streets. Families rushed into shelters. Children slept underground while bombs fell above. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble. Fire illuminated the sky. Yet even in destruction, life continued. People emerged at dawn to clear debris and prepare for the next night. What shocked the world was not just the bombing, but the response. Despite exhaustion and loss, civilians refused to break. Buses ran the next morning. Shops reopened. People stood in line, sharing quiet determination. The goal was simple: survive, endure, refuse to give in. Britain did not surrender. Against the odds, the nation held on. The skies remained contested. The invasion never came. And for the first time in the war, the advance was halted. Not by overwhelming force, but by resilience, unity, and refusal to collapse. The war was far from over, but Europe had reached a turning point, and the world was watching what would come next.